The main story that we reported on most often was probably the Vietnam peace talks. And some will find this strange, but weeks and weeks went on with arguments about the shape of the table the negotiators would sit around with. And Westerners find this kind of thing very strange. It has some significance in Asian culture, apparently, in addition to this simple effort to one-up the Americans, just to get the upper hand. And that went on fruitlessly for weeks and weeks and weeks. But there was still military action going on. And then, out of nowhere, this intelligence-gathering vessel, the Pueblo, according to the North Koreans, got into their territory. I can't tell you if it actually did or not, but they seized it. They took it, and they took the crew prisoners. Quite an international scandal, and there's no sensitivity today to how touchy that was. But those were very tense months in the Far East and in Korea in particular, and there was a real concern that it might precipitate a much more serious kind of conflict.
Actually, the Armed Forces Radio started in World War II. It was a huge thing with, every entertainer imaginable was on those Armed Forces radio shows, and those were all on large 16-inch records that they sent over and V-discs was another program in World War II that was very popular. So the legacy of World War II led to Armed Forces Radio becoming pretty much a permanent thing in television. And wherever there was a conflict, they would set up a facility. And that's, what I was a part of. And you do feel this legacy, and you feel like you're making a contribution.
I tried every day just to do the news as I would do it if it were not this kind of situation. What's the big story? That, of course, would be the first that we would lead with, what to say about it, and just be factual. I don't think I ever injected any opinion into it. That wasn't done. The best way to get through with that was just to treat each day's newscast as almost as if it were in a vacuum. This is what's important. Never mind that thousands of people are watching, and some of them have their hands pretty close to the button. We just couldn't worry about that.
And we had an audience of 10,000 people on this island in Kodiak, Alaska. Something like 3,000 to 4,000 military, and the rest were fishermen, guys who worked there, sailors on various ships, and Native Americans who lived up there. So we were it. We were the only television. We were the only radio station.
Well, that was part of our mission and part of the news, and we would concentrate on news from the States more than international news. And if we had some kind of hometown angle, we'd always work it in because that's what they wanted to hear. Didn't always have that opportunity, and our sports guys would also do that as conscientiously as possible. So we would try to include as many names and places as we could legitimately work into a newscast, and sometimes maybe even fudge it a little bit because they wanted to hear news from home. They wanted to hear about what was going on back home.
That's exactly what we were, a touch of home. We played the top 40 records of the day. I debuted music to guys, who hadn't heard this song before, which now is an oldie, and when they listen to those songs, they can remember they were on the USS Hancock or the Kodiak Naval Station.
And Armed Forces had their own record label. So we had, an amazing record library. This was thousands and thousands of discs, like LP records, but they were pressed for the Armed Forces. So you'd have, my favorite recollection is you had one record I pulled out had Frankie Yankovic on one side, who was a polka king, and the other side was Frank Zappa, Weasels Rip My Flesh, or something like that. I was like, what? Now, obviously, that wouldn't work. Either of those wouldn't work on my program, so they had a card catalog, so I just would pick things ahead of time that I knew would fit, and had a background from my earlier radio days, and just as a music fan, knowing what would fit. And never had any complaints at all. It was compliments, so that makes you feel good.
You've seen these aircraft carriers, and they catapult these jet airplanes off the ship. Well, every time they'd catapult one of those things, the needle on my record player often would go boo, and I'd have to say, well, we lost that record, let me reset it.
In military radio, you try to please everybody, so it's a patchwork quilt. And of course you can't do it because commercial radio is niche radio. You want rock, you go to a rock station. You want country, you listen country. But as the only English language station, we had something for everybody. Not enough for anybody, but something for everybody. Saturday mornings we had an hour of polka music. And one of our guys in the newsroom told me that he met one of the Polish officers in the advisory commission somewhere. And he said, Saturday mornings, we'd love it. We'd love it. He says, we go into this big office we have. We move all the furniture and cabinets and everything around to the walls. So we have this big open space. And my wife and the Czech officer's wife, we turn the radio up loud and we dance the polka for an hour. Just a little bit of home was. And so there was direct evidence that the shadow audience was listening.
People really, I think you got the impression that people really appreciated what we did, because it didn't have to be there. They could have had you could have, in that day and age, you didn't have Walkman, you didn't even have cassette players really. It was all, you think about it, it's like, wow, is this the Dark Ages? But no, it was a different era. And it was also the time when you had Bob Hope coming over to do the live shows and so forth, and it was just a morale booster. That was the main mission of AFVN, was to entertain the troops, also to keep them informed, because hey, you're in a war zone, but you don't really know what's going on. So AFVN also did a lot of coverage of the war.
Bob Hope performed on our ship the year before I got there. Bob Hope performed in Alaska a year before I got there. So I saw Bob Hope after I got out of the service and interviewed him a couple different times, and he thanked me for my service. That felt pretty good.
I do remember one phone call from one of the pretty highly placed general who was involved in, I think, the command structure in Korea, and I had led the newscast that day with the word nothing. Just nothing. He said, nothing happened today, and that's what everybody said is probably going to happen for weeks to come, and this was in regard to the peace talks, still arguing about what shape the table would be. And this general called up after the newscast. What my first impulse was to try to find out if I could still get a bus out of town. But he just said he was so happy that somebody had spoken in plain English about the fact that nothing was going on in this newscast. He said, that's when my colleagues and I discuss it, that's what we say. Nothing is happening, and it's just gratifying to hear somebody in the media say that nothing is happening.
That was one of the first times I ever got immediate feedback. It's, man, I love your show. But they did. The sailors told us, again, that they liked what we did, liked our programming.
At that time, they had what was called, if I remember correctly, the Neutral Nations Advisory Commission. Neutral nations would advise both sides, that is the North and South, and then our advisors were Swiss and Swedish. Their advisors, the North advisors, were Czech and Pole. And when I was up there that day, in fact, when holding my tape recorder, a couple of Czech officers came over and said that they had seen American television. Of course, they were watching all the time because that was also the summer that Russia invaded Czechoslovakia. And they said, take the batteries out of your machine. So I took the batteries out of my tape recorder and held them up, showed them the open machine with no batteries. And after all of that, all they wanted to do was say that they were regular viewers and they wanted to say hello to the anchor. All they wanted to do was say hello, but they had to have no batteries and there had to be no permanent evidence that they had done it.
Well, that year, I was at Kodiak, Alaska. I was Mr. Television. We went off early before I got there, the television station, and the Admiral said, couldn't we have like late night television during the week and like really late night television Friday and Saturday? Because when you're up there in Alaska, especially in the dead of winter, there's not a whole lot to do. And so television. This was pre-satellite, so now they can get just like anybody else, anything in the world. Not then. So we showed films. It was like an independent television station. And we showed Gunsmoke and Bonanza and whatever shows were on at that time, and then recent past shows. Then we started up news. We had a daily news program and anchored the news. And then on the weekend, we just went crazy and went till like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I became Mr. Potluck, because it was potluck theater. Because every Saturday night, you never knew what you were going to show. I became a character, wore a straw hat and jacket. And that's where I first grew my beard, because you could grow a beard in the Navy up in Alaska. And I got letters, cards. Kids would draw pictures of me. I became a television celebrity, and I liked it.
And this is Navy journalist Carrie Hahn saying carry on and have a marvelous Monday.
If we had anything to do with making life better for somebody, then I feel that I think that was the mission of AFEN.